The Melting Point, High Command and War in the 21st Century, is the title of the newly released book by retired General Kenneth McKenzie, former commander of US Central Command. This book is not only one of the most important military and strategic works, but also a historical testament from someone who witnessed pivotal events in the Middle East, including the elimination of ISIS leader Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi in October 2019, the assassination of Qasem Soleimani in January 2020, and the chaotic withdrawal from Afghanistan in August 2021. Given its historical significance, we are honored to speak with one of the key decision-makers of this era and the author of The Melting Point, retired General Kenneth McKenzie. General McKenzie, welcome to our special interview on Al-Arabiya. In your book, you detail the operation targeting Qasem Soleimani and mention various options you had. What specific concerns did you have about the assassination of Soleimani? And how did you arrive at the decision to target him?
The decision to strike Qasem Soleimani was based on the fact that he posed a clear and imminent danger to Americans in the region and other people in the region as well. And had he not been struck, it is quite clear that other innocent people would have died. It was not a decision that was made lightly by the President of the United States, but it was the appropriate decision given the nature of the threat. Additionally, I would say that we knew that Iran would respond, and we were prepared for that response. And when their response occurred about a week later in a missile attack on our air base at Al-Asad, we were ready for that response, and we prevented the loss of any American lives in that attack.
You mentioned that one of the options was to shoot down Soleimani's plane, but you ultimately decided against this, opting instead to strike him on the Irish Road. What led to this decision?
If we had shot down the airplane that Soleimani was flying in, innocent people would have died. That is not what we wanted to do. We wanted to strike Soleimani where no innocent people would die when the strike occurred. And I would argue that no innocent people died when we did, in fact, strike Qasem Soleimani at Baghdad International Airport.
And why did you consider multiple options? You discussed monitoring Soleimani's plane from Iran to Syria, and then to Iraq, using both aerial surveillance and ground assets. How crucial is aerial surveillance compared to ground intelligence in such operations?
As we looked at Qasem Soleimani, we used many sources of intelligence, some on the ground, some in other places. It was a complex range of intelligence products that kept us aware of what he was doing.
And what were your concerns about the repercussions of this mission?
We believed that it was likely that Iran would respond because we had killed a key leader, one who was intending to kill Americans. So it was a strike again that was certainly justified. But we felt that Iran would respond, so we took measures to be prepared when that response occurred. And when the response did in fact occur, we were ready for it.
In the 6th chapter, you talk about your visit to the Ain al-Asad base, and note that the Iranians did not attempt to avoid casualties during their attack, and you avoided significant losses. How strong was the Iranian desire for revenge after Soleimani's assassination?
I visited Al-Asad, and it was clear to me that the aiming points, the targets of the Iranian missiles that struck Al-Asad were designed to kill Americans. That was the intent of the attack. We were able to prevent those deaths because we moved our people before the Iranians attacked. And that was good work by the commanders on the ground. And that prevented the deaths of Americans, although a number of Americans did suffer traumatic brain injury based on concussions from the strikes, but we were able to prevent significant loss of life.
You also mentioned receiving reports from the State Department indicating that the Iranians communicated through an intermediary, stating their attack was a response to Soleimani's assassination. This overlaps with former President Donald Trump's claim that the Iranians informed the U.S. before their missile launch. Can you clarify this point?
So I completely disagree with what you have just described. There was no advance warning of the Iranian attack. I am unaware of any communication between the Iranians and the United States telling us that this attack was coming. What happened after the Iranian attack on al-Assad, which I emphasize again, was intended to kill Americans. The Iranians communicated not with me, but with the U.S. Department of State through the Swiss that they considered the incident over. This was after the attack occurred. But let me say one more time, just to be very clear on this. The Iranian attack against our base at Al-Assad was designed to cause mass casualties. And the reason it did not cause mass casualties was because we were able to maneuver forces in advance of the attack. So when their missiles hit the points they aimed at, which were living areas, maintenance areas, and other areas where typically Americans would be, no one was there. That is the reason there were no deaths in that attack. And that's an important point.
But let's move to another point. After Soleimani's assassination, you mentioned that you managed to re-establish a form of harsh deterrence with Iran, forcing them to reassess their actions. Do you believe this deterrence is still effective today?
So deterrence never lasts forever. It has to be refreshed. Over the last few months, as you are aware, proxy groups in Iraq and Syria have continued to attack U.S. forces in those countries. As a result, 2 months ago or so, the United States struck targets in Iraq and Syria that directly related to the chain of command for those Iranian-sponsored attacks. The attacks stopped after that. So I would tell you that deterrence has to be reestablished. I believe we have reestablished deterrence again, and we'll probably have to do it again in the future.
You've tracked Qasem Soleimani since 1979, the same year you joined the U.S. Marine Corps. Based on your study of the IRGC leaders, do you think the IRGC or Quds Force has managed to fill the void left by Soleimani's absence?
It's my best judgment that Qasem Soleimani is irreplaceable, and Iran has not been able to replace him with the current commander with the current commander of the IRGC Quds Force. He is not Soleimani's equal in planning, in leadership, or in execution.
Let's step away from the book for a moment and discuss your article in the Wall Street Journal. You described the fatalities during Soleimani's funeral in Iran as possibly resulting from internal factional conflicts. Recently, Iranian President Ibrahim Raisy's plane crash led to his death. Do you think this scenario might reflect similar internal conflicts?
That's a good question. I really have no insight into that, but I know that I would not get into an Iranian aircraft.
Moving to another topic you covered extensively in your book, Afghanistan and extremist organizations. You had a clear stance that the U.S. should maintain a small military presence in Afghanistan, rather than a complete withdrawal. Considering the time that has passed since the U.S. withdrawal, have your fears about the resurgence of ISIS and other extremist groups materialized?
I remain concerned that ISIS Khorasan is gathering strength in areas of Afghanistan where the Taliban are unable to exert control. And so, yes, I believe we are more dangerous. This is a more dangerous time now than it was before. They do intend, if possible, to conduct attacks against the United States and our homeland. They recently struck at Russia and Moscow. I think this will continue, and it is something we're going to need to watch very carefully.
Relating the book to current events in the Middle East, you've commented on the ongoing conflict in Gaza. After 8 months of war between the Israeli army and Hamas, with Israel seemingly seeking a decisive victory, do you believe the Israeli military can militarily defeat the Palestinian armed factions in Gaza?
I think it's going to be a very hard fight for the Israelis to achieve success, final success in Gaza, because they've got to remove the political leadership and the senior military leadership, as well as the combat formations of Hamas. And that process is going on. But I think it's important that we need to look to a political solution going forward and what the day after in Gaza is going to look like. And that's very important. And the day after is actually as important as the fighting. And so we need to find a way forward where the conditions that gave rise to Hamas do not continue, and where people who live in Gaza have a reasonable quality of life and aren't oppressed by Gaza. And that actually is going to take significant non-military capabilities eventually that are going to be introduced into Gaza. And that could be from Israel, or it could be from Arab friends in the region. There are a variety of ways forward to do this, but we need to think about what that solution will be going forward and what kind of sovereignty is going to be available to the people in Gaza.
You oversaw the transition of Israel from the U.S. European Command to the U.S. Central Command in 2021, aiming to integrate Israel with its Middle Eastern partners through CENTCOM. In light of the renewed tensions in the Middle East, do you think these events impact CENTCOM's daily operations?
I think that nations in the region recognize that the enduring great threat to peace in the Middle East is Iran and its irresponsible, reckless activities, its desire to proselytize and spread their revolution across the region. And so when nations in the region look at Iran, they understand that Central Command, Israel, and the United States are important partners in preparing to defend against the malign intent of Iran. And so that leads one to believe that this common desire to defend themselves against Iran will continue, and we will see it improve over time.
When we last spoke a year and a half ago, you strongly warned about Iran's growing ballistic missile program, considering it extremely dangerous. Following recent escalations between Iran and Israel, including the Iranian missile attack on Israeli targets in Damascus and Israel's response, who do you think emerged as the victor in this unprecedented military exchange?
Certainly, the Iranian attack on Israel was a clear failure. It was a maximum effort attack by Iran. It failed for several reasons. First of all, the excellence of Israeli defenses. Second, the assistance of Israel's partners and friends in the region and support from the United States. The Iranian attack, I say again, failed. What followed was an Israeli response against Iran about several days later that you're well aware of, that was measured and highly sophisticated, that demonstrated to Iran that Israel still retains the technological advantage in this fight. And Israel could have done a lot more damage. They chose not to do so in what I thought was an act of great restraint. So in summary, Israel is stronger as a result of this exchange. Iran is weaker because some of the limits and vulnerabilities of their weapons have been exposed.
Given your extensive experience in the Middle East, do you believe the conflicts in the region, including Gaza, Lebanon, Iraq, Syria, and Yemen, are trending towards resolution or further escalation?
I don't know that it's going to decline, but I don't think it's going to expand. And I think what we've seen, the recent exchange we just talked about between Israel and Iran is testimony to that. I don't believe Iran wants to go to war with Israel right now. And so I certainly hope that this war in Gaza will end soon, but I do not think there is great chance of it expanding to wider in the region.
Geographically speaking, which conflict zone, Yemen, Iraq, Syria, or Lebanon, do you think poses the greatest risk of escalating in the near future?
So I think Lebanon's a problem. I think the actions of Lebanese Hezbollah we need to watch that closely and see what happens there. I think that's a potential activity. And then I think, as we just discussed, Iran, although I think Iran has, given what just happened in April, I think they're going to be very cautious now moving into the future. But I think we should be very concerned about Lebanon.
Do you agree with the perspective that the Lebanese front, specifically between Hezbollah and Israel, could ignite at any moment? Do you think any potential conflicts would remain localized, or could they escalate into a broader war?
I think Lebanese Hezbollah and Nasrallah, their leader, will make their own strategic decisions on this. And I think he recognizes that if he goes to war with Israel, the Israeli response will be overwhelming and violent. Therefore, it's my best judgment that the conflict between Lebanese Hezbollah and Israel will remain below the boiling point. There will be fires back and forth across the border, but not a major expansion of war.